Hello, English 241 students. Welcome to Module 5, the lecture. This lecture is called Renaissance Poetry, Petrarch, and the Performance of Identity. Welcome to Module 5. This is the point in the course where British literature starts to turn inward in a very noticeable way. We move out of this medieval romance, morality drama, and collapsing kingdoms and start moving toward Renaissance lyric poetry, where writers become deeply interested in their emotions, their identity, their reputation, and in self-control. What looks personal on the surface, however, is almost never free. In this module, poetry is not emotional release. It is emotional management. To understand what these writers are doing, we need to start with Petrarch. Why Petrarch matters. Petrarch was a 14th century Italian poet whose love poetry became enormously influential across Europe. His poems often addressed to an idealized and distant beloved, define love as emotional contradiction. The speaker derives and resists, hopes and despairs, feels pleasure and pain simultaneously. Love is obsessive, it's frustrating, and inwardly consuming rather than fulfilling or stable to Petrarch. This tradition, known as Petrarchian love poetry, establishes several key features that will shape Renaissance writing. Those are love as this internal conflict, the beloved as distant or unattainable, a speaker who is trapped in contradiction, and then lastly, intense inward focus. By the time we reach the English Renaissance, Petrarch's style is everywhere. English writers do not simply copy him, they adapt Petrarch to fit English political, social, and cultural realities. That adaptation, is the heart of this module. We're going to move now to Sir Thomas Wyatt the Elder and the anxiety of court life. Sir Thomas Wyatt the Elder introduces Petrarchian poetry into English literature, but his tone is noticeably different from Petrarch's, where Petrarch's suffering can feel dramatic or even theatrical. Wyatt's poems feel tense, guarded, and often they feel bitter. That difference comes from the context. Wyatt served at the court of Henry VIII, a place where political danger was constant, and favor could disappear overnight, and speaking too openly could actually be risky for people. As a result, Wyatt the Elder's love poetry often reads less like romantic confession, and it reads more like an expression of frustration, withdrawal, and emotional exhaustion. In poems such as The Long Love That in My Thought Doth Harbor and I Find No Peace, Petrarchian contradiction remains, but it feels heavier. Desire never settles into satisfaction. Emotional instability mirrors political insecurity. What veileth truth pushes this even further by questioning whether honesty, loyalty, or devotion have any real value in a corrupt system. Wyatt's Petrarchian speaker is not just lovesick, he is actually navigating his survival. Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, and the idea of control. So Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, builds on Wyatt's innovations, but then brings a smoother and more refined voice to English poetry. His poems often feel calmer, more balanced, and more confident overall. Where Wyatt sounds defensive and strained, Surrey sounds like he is composed. Surrey reflects Renaissance ideals of proportion, harmony, and restraint. His use of nature imagery and polished form suggests that emotion should be shaped rather than indulged. Love exists, but it does not overwhelm reason, Surrey says. Petrarchan desire remains, but it is discipline. This shift matters. Renaissance poetry increasingly treats identity as something to be constructed through control. The self is not revealed by emotion, but shaped by it. Surrey's work shows how poetic form becomes a model for emotional discipline. Next, we'll talk a little bit about Elizabeth I, where Petrarch meets power. Queen Elizabeth I changes the stakes entirely. Unlike Wyatt and Surrey, Elizabeth writes from a position of supreme authority, but she also faces intense pressure as a woman who's ruling alone in a patriarchal society. Every word she speaks or writes must reinforce her legitimacy. On Monsieur's departure, Petrarchan restraint appears again, but now it serves political authority. Emotion is acknowledged briefly, then contained. Personal feeling never outweighs sovereignty. This careful balance defines Elizabeth's writing. The verse exchange with Sir Walter Raleigh demonstrates how poetry functioned as public performance at court. Wit, loyalty, and restraint matter as much as Feeling does. Poetry becomes a display of allegiance in this sense. The speech to the troops at Tilbury shows this most clearly. Although it's not a poem, it is one of the most powerful pieces of rhetoric that we study. Elizabeth blends vulnerability and authority and presents herself as both woman and as king. Language becomes a tool for leadership, unity, and command. This is Petrarchan self control scaled up to national power. So, what's this module really about? Across Wyatt and Surrey and Elizabeth, Petrarch provides the emotional vocabulary, but English writers then reshape it to fit the circumstances that surround them. Poetry becomes a way to negotiate power, reputation, identity, and survival. As you read, you should resist the urge to ask, what does this writer feel? Instead, ask, why is this feeling being presented this way? Tone, restraint, and contradiction matter more than confession do in this case. This module is especially important for preparing you for comparative analysis. You're now seeing how similar themes appear across texts, but produce different meanings depending on position and the pressure applied. By the end of Module 5, British literature is no longer just telling stories or teaching moral lessons, it is actively constructing identity through language, and that shift carries us directly into Shakespeare and beyond. Remember that this week you have to do a discussion board assignment, you have to do your video journal post, as well as you have to tell me what your thesis for your major writing assignment number 2 is, and I need an outline for that essay as well. So again, this week, there's no reading response because you'll be working on that thesis and outline. All right, thank you much. That's the lecture for Module 5. Good luck. Let me know if you need anything. Let me know if you need anything. Sorry.